were not the beneficiaries of it because they weren't. And so it does exist. So we've got to get beyond our little houses. You know, us white people have to get beyond our little house and say, we have been privileged, we have been favored. And along with that, we have to understand that black people in the United States have been treated worse than any other people group. And we as white people typically don't want to understand that. We don't want to see it, we don't want to admit it. And there's a different journey for everybody. And we have to get it. We have to get it. Relationship, education, we have to get it, we have to understand. So to me, education and honesty, but yes, to say it doesn't exist is foolish.
Anyone else?
Well, I'll chime in, certainly speaking from the white perspective. With Councilman Reed, you mentioned my forefathers in the white race have committed a great transgression against the African American people. Slavery, 100 years of Jim Crow, all through the civil rights movement, and what we would call modern day racism or institutional racism is alive and well. I'm convicted that as a white person I need to take responsibility for that, even though I wasn't there 100 years ago. Something terrible happened that has left the African American race still oppressed to this day. That concerns me deeply, and I really agree with what Pastor George said. Education is real important. I have experienced in my last 12 years that I've been deeply involved in working on racial healing with Pastor Cassandra and a number of others here in the city. There's kind of three categories of white people. One category is they're completely uneducated and ignorant of racism happening today. Probably the majority would say, I don't think there is a race problem in our country. That troubles me significantly. Secondly, there's a group that knows about it but really doesn't care because they're on the privileged side of things, and they have to come out of their comfort zone to get involved, to address it, so they just kind of ignore it. And then I think there's a third category, and maybe a minority, I don't know that for sure, that really care deeply and feel deeply about this issue and want to be involved and want to take action steps. As complicated as it is, there's a whole group of white people, and we saw them at the police station that day. Hundreds of people came out. That was part of the group that really cares and wants to be involved. So white privilege is alive and well.
So I think the two white folks on the panel have outlined and made the omittance, which Pastor Weston started off saying, and that's not to be offensive, but I think in terms of how you did it, I want to maybe take the conversation from the omittance and sort of the way you all have characterized it, from the sort of institutional racism that exists in Kansas City as it relates to the boundaries that divide our city, with truth's historically been a racial dividing line for poor versus rich, have versus have-nots. And as our conversation is about tonight, you know, police and community relations, how does that boundary in terms of institutional racism or oppression that exists, how does that actually relate with the two? If someone wants to maybe take a stab with that.
I've worked with youth for 25 years in the inner city. I would say there's a stress level between the police and the youth. I did not believe a lot of things still existed to this day until I started having basketball teams and traveling, and you know, they would tell me things and I say those things don't exist anymore, and then they did, such as like read, children, whatever, black, white, Hispanics could not go into a store together. Those things still exist. If we went to a restaurant, they would put the close sign over, and they would say, you know, Miss Nancy, let's just go somewhere else. It broke my heart to see that still happening, but it does exist. And so they feel tension, they feel hurt. And you know what? I've been talking about this for 25 years. Let's do something. Let's do something about it.
Now, and I think that's a good response, and if anyone from the committee, from the panel want to respond, and I'm probably fine with us being able to have this discussion from an open forum as well, just as long as we don't find ourselves getting out of hand. So if anyone wants to maybe chime in, if you have a response too, feel free to raise your hand, and let's kind of go from there as well. And now I will open up, I saw your hand first, Mr. Tober, and then we'll come over here, so please.
In regard to racism, I think racism exists among all people, of all colors, all over the globe. Therefore, for me, I view it as sort of a constant that's out there. Now, the question is, what difference does that make to my life? And since we won the civil rights struggle, which I'm happy to say I participated in, I'm Martin Luther King's rights, I think there are no barriers for black people in America today for what you want to do with your life. And I hear a lot of people sort of saying there's no point in me trying very hard to get anywhere because racism isn't going to let me. And I think that's a self-defeating proposition that isn't true. And with respect to the police, given the fact that people are dying in these police, particularly young black male encounters or police black encounters, I think the thing we really ought to stress, without getting into history and racism and all that, is how to deport yourself when you have encounters with the police. I'm glad to see Burrow here because I claim, and I don't know if it's true or not, that I've filed more complaints against the Kansas City Police Department than anyone else in this town. However, I can't say that in my encounters with them, race has been the big issue. It hasn't been. I've been arrested a couple of times, handcuffed, and I've always gotten out of it alive, and no one ever even pulled a gun on me. So I think we need to stress today to people how to deport yourself when you have contact with the police department. And whether or not there is racism in their minds or hearts, I think they've come a long way since Rodney King at getting that stuff under control.
Can I just say one quick thing? So you began by setting up the question and talking about the racial dividing line, the historic racial dividing line, which is truth. And so when you think about the history of Kansas City, when my family first came to Kansas City in the early 50s, you couldn't live past 27th Street, right? And you know, it wasn't until Brown versus Board of Education and DSEG, you had the white flight, then you had the black flight. You know, but even today, you know, I share with folks all the time that Kansas City is one of the cities that as I've traveled across the country, that is still a lot really polarizing when it comes to the economic segregation. And that kind of plays out racially because of the concentration of poverty in many of our communities. But when you can drive down Truce and go 3 blocks west and see a difference in investing in the infrastructure versus going 3 blocks east and see a divestment in the infrastructure, that lends to the consequences of the racial institutionalized policies that once existed. However, if you still live east of Truce, your insurance can be higher.
You're right.
And so it still plays out
Yes, it does.
on an institutional level. And so when we're talking about does institutional racism exist, it's hard to sort of draw lines to racism, but when you look at the people who are impacted, it's disproportionately people of color. And so that's why it's still a conversation today.
You know, and I want to be able to allow the community here to be thinking, because I'm going to break us up into groups very soon here, and I want us to be thinking from the standpoint of how all of us play a role. So if you have your agenda, or if you have some notepads or something, please take notes so that when we break off into groups, that we also can be able to capture a number of these things, because when we leave from here, I want us to be able to have sort of what are some next steps and what is it that we can do to actually make that larger difference from how we're framing this conversation. So I don't want us to just think that, oh, we're having a conversation, and we're talking about the things that we already know that exist. But again, just in terms of us framing this, I want us to be able to look further into how we can make sort of the larger impact as well. You had your hand up, and I don't know who wants to go first, whichever one of you ladies, so please.
Well, I'd certainly just like to say,
Let me say, if you could talk no more than 2 minutes if you
I'll be
can.
quick.
Okay.
I certainly would like to say it's a powerful conversation. I commend all of you for bringing this up and talking about white privilege. It's not a taboo word to say anymore. And because of the importance and because of the Midwest, I certainly want everyone to know that there will be a white privilege conference in Kansas City, April 27th through the 30th. Just to have the conversations. This is the 18th year of that conference, and it will be April 27th through the 30th. And I attended last year, it was in Philadelphia. The interesting thing about it is, to me, 65 to 70% of the people that come to that conference are white. They are open, they want to help, they want to be a part, so it's going to take all of us in the city to help make that a success.
Okay, just to clarify, you said April, is it April 2017?
2017, yes, April 27th.
And that's a good sort of resource, so I want to make sure we make a note there and put a pin there, because there are going to be some other resources that we need to make sure that we have. I don't think we have a board, but I think there's a board behind there, but we need to be able to get those kind of things out. Yes, ma'am, you have your
I'm
hand
gonna
up.
keep mine brief because I'm gonna keep it limited to the specific
Sure.
subject. And in that, I'm gonna basically reflect to what I talked to you about when we were doing, was trying to be part of the change. So first of all, it has to be a mentality of changing the hearts of men. And that's the first thing that we have to do before we can get to the point of doing anything else. And that comes from opening up the dialogue like we're doing today, but it has to come past just a panel discussion.
Yeah.
We actually ended up creating relationships with the police officers as we were on our daily campouts. And in that, I'm gonna say basically to our allies and the white citizens that are concerned about it, as my minister would say at my church, if you see something, you have to say something. And I think far too much, we in society say, that's not my business. And we turn our heads and we walk away from the circumstance. But especially as being someone that is concerned for how the black community is treated, it's more important for us to be able to make the change, for you to say something versus us saying something. Because all they look at is us being angry black people and complaining.
Yes.
I think that's probably maybe a good transition point, and I want to probably bring you into the conversation as it relates to what are some of those community policing initiatives that are already taking place that we as a community, because again, defining this is an important piece. I think, when we get into a lot of these conversations, there's always the elephant in the room that exists that no one wants to talk about, but it's there. And so as we, touched on those larger sort of things that address, what are some of those community initiatives, and how are these going to be, and how are they enacted in our community? And also I would throw in there, because one of the other missing pieces here is our young people, and how we're able to address sort of that mentoring piece, programs very similar to Police Athletic League with PAL and other areas throughout our community. How are we as a police department in Kansas City able to address those sort of initiatives that need to take place, that we move away from the institutionalized things that exist, but into a more proactive role of being able to be change agents?
Forgive me if I stand, because I want you to be able to see it here. Good evening.
Good evening.
Thank you for having us. My name is Merrill Bennett. I'm with the Office of Community Complaints. We are the civilian oversight body for the Kansas City, Missouri Police Department. We do not work for the police department. We work for the Board of Police Commissioners. As many of you know, we are the only city in the country where the police department is not under the authority of the municipality in which it resides. So we are a separate. I'm sure many of you did not know that we are the oldest continuously operating civilian oversight agency in the entire country. We've been operational for 47 years. So when everybody's talking about civilian review boards and we're establishing civilian review boards, Kansas City has had it for 47 years. Okay, now to answer the question, about community police initiatives. What can we do? First of all, to kind of go along with what's already been said, let me give you just a brief my background. I'm not from Kansas City. I am a native son of the great state of Georgia. Okay, my parents were in the civil rights movement. So when you talk about the animosity or the tension between police and community, I grew up hearing those stories. Okay, I went and got my law degree in the University of Illinois. That was my first introduction to the Midwest. And then I've been in Kansas City for 15 years. So even with all that, first thing you have to do is educate yourself about police policy and procedure. Too often we allow street legal education, we allow television, we allow social media, and we allow misinformation to guide our discussion regarding what is allowable and permissible under the law. And so when you do that, and then you come to us and we say, well, no, that wasn't necessarily a violation of policy procedure, now you're mad at me. Okay? But that doesn't help the situation, because now you've left with a bad taste in your mouth regarding the police department, when in fact, sometimes, not always, you've actually been operating off bad information. Okay? So it is imperative as a community that we educate ourselves. How do we educate ourselves? As we said, we have to become a part of that process. We have to get engaged and involved with the police department. Tomorrow there'll be a Board of Police Commissioners meeting. It starts at 10 o'clock, and I know there's conversation about it being in the middle of the day, but there'll be community folks there for the first 15 minutes, and then the room will vacate. And then decisions will be made regarding the police department, and discussions will be had regarding police-community relations, and there'll be no community folk there. So we have to become involved and engaged with the process. We have to be vocal, like you said. When you see something, say something. All right? When you see something, say something. If there is somebody out there who is violating policy and procedure, then it helps us develop a record of things that are going on. It helps us to make training recommendations. It helps us to identify officers who may be in trouble, whether it's in their personal life or the professional life. It helps us to do that, and it helps us to engage you as well. Okay? So we have to be involved in that process. Also, you talked about what initiatives and programs are out there. There are so many programs out there that allow you to become involved with the police department. I can't even name them all. I mean, there are a lot of them. You talk about the police athletic league, when you talk about the officers getting out and being involved in the community and community meetings such as these. This shouldn't be the start, but this is a start. Okay? So you have one thing that I found out, because granted, when I was in Atlanta, I went to undergrad at Morehouse College during the 90s, so we had Freaknik going on. If anybody remember Freaknik. It was fun being out in them streets. But I know every time that the party got broken up, it was the police that broke it up. So I can't say that I was always a fan of the police department, because we knew that the party was going to stop when they showed up. However, one thing that we did as a student initiative, we became involved and we became familiar with the officers that were in our location. It is a two-way street. I know people often complain and say, well, the officers need to get out of their cars and they need to get involved and they need to be engaged, but we also need to engage the officers that police our communities. You need to go up to the station and find out which officers are patrolling your sector. You need to find out who the sergeant is, who supervises the officers that are patrolling your sector. We have to be able to communicate one with another. If I know you, it's easier for us to work out our problems. I never met you. I guarantee you, if you would have slapped me right now, I would be mad at you for a very long time. But I know this man over here, and if he slapped me, I'll be mad at him about 10, 15 minutes, but we're going to be able to work it out. That's not a race thing. We have to be able to get involved with each other so that we have familiarity, so that we can discuss these problems. Okay? So that's a start. I don't want to take up all the time, but that's a start. And also, and I'm going to say this, and my boss, Ms. Fain, is back there, and I know she might look at me like I'm crazy, but you need to hold us, the Office of Community Complaints, accountable for each and every complaint that is filed, you need to make sure that you hold us accountable. Make sure that we're doing our jobs. Don't file a complaint and then just let it go and be mad when you get a letter